Welcome to the South and Sideways podcast on the Urban Sentinel channel. I am your host, the Urban Sentinel. This is podcast episode 04, Gangs, Soldiers, and Mercenaries. So let's get into it. Gang violence, lawlessness, the unabashed brutality of our world, a aspect that is sometimes highlighted, but many of the times it's downplayed or it's overlooked entirely. Now, across the globe, there are no locations that I'm aware of that don't have issues with gangs. Some on large numbers, some on small numbers. It all depends upon where you're at and what time period and what's going on. But when you think about different places, you look at the continent of Africa, you think about just even a few of the countries in there, Nigeria, South Africa, Somalia, the Democratic Republic, they all have issues with gangs. You think about the names that you may have heard, such as Boko Haram, or the Mungiki, or the Numbers Gang. You think about the methods that those gangs use to gain the power that they have: bribery, intimidation, violence, extorting businesses, individuals, in many cases coercing and co-opting government officials, or outright assassinations and removing the people that are the obstacles. Law enforcement in many of those locations are part of the gangs or working for or with the gangs. But it's not exclusive to them. Currently in the news, you hear about Haiti and all of the trouble they're having since their government effectively fled and, left the building. That you have gangs fighting other gangs. One of them was a former police officer. I believe his name was, what the hell was his name? Jimmy Sherzirier, or Sherzir, but they call him Barbecue. Now, he had been a police officer and he had started his own personal campaign against corrupt officials and the bureaucracy several years back. And he effectively formed his own gang to go after the very gangs that were supporting the corrupt politicians and the bureaucrats and other law enforcement. And now, since the government has effectively fallen, his gang is at war with several of the other gangs in a no-holds-barred scenario. You think about Venezuela during their economic collapse, where effectively all commodities that weren't immediately controlled by the government through the military were effectively taken by the gangs. And you had not just simply rationing or high-priced racketeering and black marketing going on. You had outright exchanges of, you want food for your family, this is what you're going to do. Or if you want to leave the city, here's the price that you have to pay. All of those gangs, no matter where they are, you can point at the cartels throughout Mexico, Central and South America. They hold almost a Hollywood-like celebrity status for the amount of power that they wield, because they have entire governments, in many cases, working for them. Some cases somewhat willingly, other cases it's just the way that you get business done. But they control thousands and thousands of miles of land and territory, farmers, townspeople, businesses, roads of transport, you name it, they have their hands on it, not just simply in a nondescript sort of way, not in a Tony Soprano, I work in waste management, tongue-in-cheek kind of way, but in an outright over, these are the areas that they control. And here in the United States, we're no different. Now, we may not necessarily be on the same level of consistent open warfare that you see. We have had our periods. I remember growing up in the 80s, gang warfare as a whole was not a thing in my particular neck of the woods, but it was something that we were well aware of. If you strayed too far down the highway, you could end up in a totally different situation when you got off that exit. The FBI estimates, based upon their compiled data from the Department of Justice and other institutions, calculate that on average, the United States has about 20,000 to 33,000 domestic gang members in America. And that's effectively what they can body bag and toe tag, whether it be members that have been caught and sentenced and put in prison, or known members through various task force and other identifying factors. But that does not include external affiliate gangs, meaning you might be part of a gang here in the U.S., born and raised, but your gang is directly connected to another gang in Colombia, in Venezuela, or someplace else. And oftentimes they send members from those countries up to the United States, whether it's a business thing going on or whether it's to expand territory, provide a little extra aid, or sometimes take corrective disciplinary actions on members in the gang. And that also does not include people that work for gangs, whether it's directly and openly and willingly or unwillingly, that help felicitate all of the actions and transactions that gangs need to do that they themselves can't get done. Now, when you spread those numbers, that 20,000 to 33,000 out across the country evenly, one, it's not made that way. Two, those numbers seem relatively small. They're almost infinitesimal. But thinking about, it does not take that many people to cause a little trouble, and it doesn't take that many people to consistently cause trouble. Now, sure, if you've got 5 guys hanging out in a parking lot near a recreational facility, looking tough, mean mugging people and trying to shake a couple of people down for dollars, that's something that can be handled pretty quickly. And by and large, those aren't gangs. Those are just a bunch of little neighborhood nobodies that's all they amount to. But they know well enough exactly how far their territory goes and where not to step if they actually don't want to run conflict with a real gang with real consequences. But when you think about the actual gangs, the ones pushing narcotics, the ones engaging in actual shootouts with other gang members, the ones engaged in prostitution, robbery, theft, all of the criminal elements that you think about, that you hear about when you think of those gangs, they are a much bigger situation. And in many cases, yes, a lot of them, they have territory, they have their neighborhoods, they have their section of a street, whether it's defined by a highway, whether it's defined by some large building or vacant lot, or whether it's defined by simply where a section of corners meet. One gang stays on one corner, the other gang stays on the other corner, and that's it. However it may be done, they have enough that they can cover their areas and they look to expand, whether it's expanding a part of their business, their operation, or it's looking to just give themselves a little buffer, a little cushion to make sure that no one sneaks up on them. And when you get into larger metropolitan cities, that area becomes a lot more difficult to define. Yes, you can look on a map and police can show you that, oh, this housing project here and these set of houses over here and this apartment structure here and this shopping area here are under the control of this gang. But in terms of simply removing that, that becomes the more difficult part. Now, transitioning and looking at what has been going on over the last few years, especially over the last 5 years, you're seeing more cases of gang activity increasing. You're seeing what we would have considered to be bold and brazen moves by gangs now to become run-of-the-mill and regular. And you have to think, what is the primary cause of that? One, recruiting. They are getting more members, more people are joining up because there are many more people in their neighborhoods that aren't necessarily looking to go out and hurt people. They're not looking to go out and do harm, but they also realize that they have a simple choice. Try to exist in their life, in their little circle, and not be affected, which will be impossible, or at least join that gang and have a little bit of protection, a little bit of peace of mind, a chance that you may not become the next victim by someone that lives down the street from you. Whatever the case may be, numbers are up. But the other thing that is affecting that is police, law enforcement, and laws being enforced. Those are going the other way. Now, you can say what you want about the last 5 years in terms of the whole defund the police movement. Now, do I personally think that police need more training when it comes to that level of de-escalation being handled? That there are clear cases where you may have a simple minor, literal minor offense, nothing major, it's not a felony, no life loss, no harm, no foul, and the law enforcement individual police officer goes from 0 to 100 and escalates a situation well beyond what it needs to be, and sometimes that's fatally. Yes, there needs to be a change with that. But in terms of supporting the concept that we don't need police, that we should abolish or abandon or strictly reduce their numbers to a superficial parking meter level, that I find ridiculous, because the very first thing that happens is when you are highly confident as an individual that commits crime that you're not going to bump into a cop on your way to, during, or after you've committed that crime, is hearing that people want to reduce the numbers of police. They want to cut down the number of officers on shift. They want to reduce the areas that they patrol to, because those areas that they patrol in is where they tend to run into conflicts with the citizens that live there. And you have escalating situations that evolve, and then the whole cycle starts all over again. People don't like to admit it, but criminals are not dumb. Okay. I've said this in different videos that I've done, but criminals are not dumb. They are people just like everyone else. They are very smart people. You have average people. You do have some people that are, slow to get on board. But they can look, they can listen, they can understand that if they're in a city, if they're in an area where the crime is rising and the police law enforcement is lowering because of civilian distaste and distrust of that governing and authority body, they know that they can get away with more and they can do it more often because there will be fewer police on shift to respond. They're not going to respond to every single type of call. In fact, the city of Pittsburgh right now is, I will say, still toying with the idea of reducing the number of officers on their third shift, I believe, somewhere between the hours of 3 a.m. and 7 a.m., based upon their statistics that those are the hours that the fewest number of actual life-threatening or felonious calls come in for committing major felonies and crimes and bodily harm, which I get that. That's understandable. I personally feel that if you're going to have a police force that polices, it should be a 24/7 thing, no shift preferential. It is what it is because crime and accidents and other things that police officers often do, which is more the case than anything else, you should have cops on duty all the time. There shouldn't be a lack or a drop in that police coverage. But with that being said, Pittsburgh is looking to reduce that. They're looking to switch away from handling, shall we say, less than life-threatening calls. They go to the switchboard, they go to the 911, and it's noted down. But after that, you're on your own for actually getting anything done. You have to go down to a station or a precinct office to fill out a report if you want further investigation done. I believe the example was you come home from work and you see someone stealing your lawnmower out of your shed. You can call the local number for the police and say there is someone actively stealing my property from my house, from my yard. That's one call that a police officer will show up to versus you get home and you find that your shed has been broken into and your lawnmower has been stolen. You call that number, they're going to say, okay, well, here's the location where you can come down and file a report and we'll, send it over to the investigation unit and they'll contact you when they get your case. So that slight difference, although, yes, you can understand that, okay, well, the lawnmower's already gone. You didn't see who did it. You may have an idea, but again, you're not the police. You don't go out and investigate it, and it gets pushed to the side. It's in that gap, in that window, unfortunately, that's where a lot of the criminals are going to see their time to shine, their advantages to do these crimes, because many of the crimes are petty. But now you're going to have a larger number of these petty crimes occur. And the problem being is that should a person, just an everyday minding their own business person, wake up in the middle of the night, realize that someone has broken into their house, realize that someone is rummaging through their stuff and is stealing things, and their intent is not to, go toe to toe with them, say it with their chest and fight the person off. Their intent is simply to say, hey, get out of my house, get out of my apartment right now. But things go from 0 to 60 very quickly, and suddenly that burglary becomes a home invasion, becomes an assault, becomes a potential homicide situation. The police will be called and the police will show up, but it has reached that point, unfortunately, where that will be something that occurs on a regular basis across many cities that, shall we say, lack in their ability to enforce the actual laws on the judicial end. Because you can arrest someone for a crime, and then you can bring them to court and they can be tried and they can be found guilty. But if, effectively speaking, they are let go to go back onto the street to either return for a court date later on, they promise to appear, or if in fact they have been sentenced and the sentence by itself is a low number of years. And in most criminal cases, especially in most of the correctional facilities around the country, overcrowding is an issue. So someone may get a 5-year sentence for theft, depending upon what it was. But that 5-year sentence, they'll only have to serve half of that in the prison system because of it's a non-violent crime. It was just theft. But most likely they'll be in a prison that has some crowding or overcrowding issues, and they'll be released early, probably after a year and a couple of months, and to go out and basically be on parole for the rest of that time. Now, some people, it might have been their first offense and they just decide that, prison is not for me, and they turn their lives around. Other people, it's just a walk in the park and they're back out and they're going to get back on top exactly where they left off before. And it's in those cases, especially in the cashless bail system, where you can commit certain crimes and get released that day, no worries, nothing to pay, and off you go. And if you should choose to not return for your appointed court date, well, the only thing they can do is put out a bench warrant for you. And yes, true, a lot of people do get caught a few days later, weeks later, months later, with those exact things that happen because they forget about it. They think, well, there's so many thousands of people that are out there. They're not going to bother with me and my measly $1,200 shoplifting arrest. They're going to go after, the big people, the murderers and the rapists. And yes, that is true. But it's always that one police officer at that one point and that one time going, hey, I think I remember this space. And then, with our modern technology today, which is something you forget about, facial recognition, whether you like it or not, is here and it is going to continue to improve because it's a full biometric system. It's going to be not just simply your face, it's going to be your fingerprints, it's going to be your walk, your body posture, your composition. It will be synchronized mapping of everything that matches you in a certain percentage group all over the place. So even with, for example, if you leave the house wearing black pants and a maroon hooded sweatshirt and a black hat and glasses, and you're about 5'6" and you're at 155, and you have an overall near standard walking pattern, no limp, nothing distinctive like that, you can have biometric systems on different cameras all across your city, not even directly connected to each other, just different buildings, different businesses, different homes, but they all have the same similar software that's tracking and recording everything. And then when you are at some point put into the system and the algorithm is told, look for this based upon these biometrics, it will get access to all those diverse systems as one. And the AI will simply scan through tens of thousands of images and videos second after second after second until it comes up with a percentage match. Some of them aren't you. Some of them look very similar, but they're in the wrong place at the same time that they're looking for you someplace else. But then it'll get a hit on those few items that say, hey, this person, this location, it tracks, and it puts it up on a map and says, yeah, it's possible to get from this vehicle at that traffic light here to this location a half mile down the road here, inside this store 500 feet from this intersection over here. So this is most likely the individual you're looking for. And when you think about the governments as a whole, with the laws and policies that many governments put in place, they almost counteract each other. You'll have one state that is very loose and relaxed on crime, except for the most extraneous cases where it is just a heinous crime that occurs. And you'll have other governments just across the border in another state that are harsh and tough on crime for every single thing. Now, with both cases, you look at it and you say, well, they're two separate things. How do they relate? It's simple. The government that is harsh and tough on all levels of crime, while yes, it may seem heavy-handed, it tends to reduce the number of crimes and criminals because they know that they're going to get pinched for just about anything that they do, and they could be looking at longer time for small crimes than they would in the state next door. And guess where that crime starts to migrate with the criminals? That's right, to the place next door that believes in, well, we're not going to fill our jails with nonviolent offenders, so we're going to release them. We're not going to fill our system up with first time, second time, third time offenders, so we'll let them go. We're not going to fill our prisons and our jails up with people who have been tried and convicted of a crime, but this is a slightly different crime than what they did before. So even though it's not their first time committing crime, it's their first time committing this crime, so we'll let them go. Now, that's not to say that all places are like that, and it's that simple black and white across the board. But you do see that there is a distinct pattern, and just like anything else, if you were a criminal that just simply breaks into houses when people are gone on vacation, and you're driving down one street, and on that street you see 10 houses, 5 on each side, and on one side of the street, as you're going down, you see most of those houses all have small fences around their yards. You see out of those 5 houses, 3 of them have security lights on them. You see one of the houses has a dog clearly visible inside the fenced area of the yard with the doghouse in presence. So that tells you that that dog is effectively outside in that yard 24/7. And you see the last house, they've got somewhat neatly manicured bushes, and they've got looks to be cameras and lights up as well. On the other side of the street, of those 5 houses, you see 2 have fences, but those fences are only on one side around the house. It only goes to the front, or it only goes between that house and the neighbor's house. You see two houses that have weeds, trees, bushes, and scrubs growing all over the place. The yard is a mess. You can't really see the house. It's entirely covered, as it were. You see another house because as you're going down, it's gotten a little bit darker. It's just about past sunset, so most people have their lights on the inside. You see that one house, you can see, oh, they've got a TV in the living room, and it looks like someone's working on a laptop on the kitchen counter. And oh, you can see into a bedroom, someone's just getting back from work, and they're taking off their shiny-looking watch and putting it on their nightstand with their wallet. Why? Because they don't believe in curtains or blinds. They just have nice-looking shears, which great when everything is completely dark inside the house, but when you have your lights on and it's dark outside, that's what people look for. So you get a burglar who drives down that street and looks at their options. They're going to avoid the houses with the alarm stickers and the motion lights and the dog, and they're going to look on the other side of the street, and they're going to say, well, yeah, sure, those two houses that you can't really see, they can sneak up on them, but you can't really see anything at all. They're kind of, well, they look like the house that if they did go in, they would actually be the victim once they got inside there. So what house is left? That house with all of the proper signals and keys that says to that individual burglar, hey, we don't care what people see when they look inside, because we're not those type of people to be worried about what other people think about us or what they see if they looked at us. So we have nothing to hide. And that's fine, because now they know exactly the TV, the laptop, the wallet, the jewelry, and everything else that you have, because they can see it all. And then when that individual family comes back from their outing and they find that they've been burglarized and all of their stuff is gone, and they wonder, well, why hasn't anyone else had this problem? That's the reason why. Criminals don't like conflict. Yes, conflict happens. And yes, there are individuals that, if that challenge, as it were, to their authority occurs, they will handle the situation to the best of their ability. But overall, criminals don't like conflict. They want to get in, get the goods, and get out, whether it's stealing a car, stealing a wallet, taking the TV off the wall, whether it's coming in the middle of the night, shaking you down for money, breaking into a business to steal some of the equipment. Whatever it is, they want to get in, get the goods, and get gone, because speed is of the essence. The only thing worse than being slow is being sloppy when you get done. If you're leaving too much evidence behind, then that's where the problems come down. And these are things that, if the individual criminal didn't know it beforehand, they learn it pretty soon after they get to prison, because prison is nothing but a seminar for the number of years that you're in learning how you got caught, how other people got caught, how some people got away with the crimes that they did, where they look, how they look, and what they look for when they're investigating a crime, and even to the point of how you can get out early, how you can get on release, the right keywords to say to the right parole board or prison psychologist to show that you've gained empathy for the things that you've done, and you feel bad about the way that you behaved, and you want another chance to go back out into society and prove that you can be a good, decent human being, and you can hear those violins playing. They learn all of that in prison. Now, sure, not every person that goes in, again, comes out with the intent on being bigger, badder, and bolder. A lot more people come out with the desire not to go back in. It does not mean that they have lost the desire to commit criminal acts. It just simply means they no longer have the desire to get caught and be sent back to prison. Moving from that point, where we're at now in our society, you're seeing a greater conflict between people getting away with what may seem to be small, innocuous crimes that tag team onto larger crimes, because nothing is being addressed. Because on one aspect, the fear of addressing one individual for a small, petty crime could unleash a torrent of protest from people that see that as harassment when it's actually enforcing the law. So then not enforcing those things leads to a buildup of those small crimes, and then an increase to larger crimes. And you get wave upon wave of larger crimes going on, where now the very same people that would have protested you infringing upon someone's right to express themselves in a manner that, well, is still illegal, now want to know why the police aren't doing enough and why the politicians aren't doing enough to stop these people from robbing, assaulting, and murdering people when they should be locked up. They're letting them back out on the street. And they're letting them back out on the street because you have no cash bail systems popping up everywhere, because it's discriminatory to put a bail onto someone who's committed a crime. Now, I feel neither one way or the other about that system. I feel that, yes, bail should be afforded to everyone and bail should be affordable. I feel if you're going to have bail, there needs to be literally a menu standard. So that way, any type of crime, whatever it is, from misdemeanor all the way up to a capital felony, has a minimum to maximum bail amount that is reasonable to the proportion of the crime. If you could put a value on it, it's easier to do that, I'm sure, when you're talking about, stealing a car versus, murder, things like that. So you obviously want to have a higher bail for someone who's committed an act like that. But if you're not going to have a bail, well, then you're not going to have a bail. And at that point, no one gets to say boo about it. It's simply, you're going to catch them. They're going to, raise their hand and say, I promise to show up on my court date, and you let them go. And then they can go out, commit another crime to be caught and charged for that crime to be let go again. If at the minimum, there should be a system where if you have a no cash bail policy and a person has already been arrested and released on one offense, if they get arrested on a second offense within 6 months of their a set appointment to go to court, whether it's be before or even just after, then they go in. They go into jail a couple months until that gets sorted out. So that would maybe reduce the possibility of some people becoming repeat offenders, knowing that the second time they get caught within a 6-month window, they could end up back in jail for the remainder of the 6 months to finish their time right off the top, no matter what the original crime was. With the gang systems that are going on now, there is another level being added to it. Again, the gangs of now are not the gangs of even the 80s or the gangs before that. They are a much more organized group because they're being trained and controlled by people who have spent time either in law enforcement or in the military in different countries. They are having situations where, yes, the Department of Defense has acknowledged that there are gangs and gang members throughout the United States military, and they do make the effort to eliminate and remove those people. And I don't mean eliminate as in kill, I mean eliminate the possibility of gangs forming within the military, but it's very hard to do because you have to either have someone on the inside that's willing to point fingers, and the whole snitches get stitches things takes on a totally different meaning when you're going to snitch on a group of individuals that, just like you, have literally been trained to kill by the United States government. It makes sleeping easy in your bunk not a very easy thing to do. But when you have gang members that do in fact join the military, get military training, get an idea of tactics and operations and things like that, and they get out of the military and they keep their gang affiliation and they go back and they teach their street gang how to do those things, how to find the right weapons, how to utilize the weapons that they have, and how to control their territory and expand their territory, that's when those gang wars start to get very, very dicey, because now it's not simply a couple of guys in different colors yelling at each other across the street, and one guy pulls out a gun and fires 15 rounds from a manufacturer standard magazine across the street and hits nobody. Now it's a case of they start watching the neighborhood, they start watching the block, they pick their targets, they set up an ambush point, and they take that opposition out. And you, as a civilian, only hear about there was a shooting today at such and such a street. Witnesses say they heard 12 shots fired and a victim was found with 8 shots in their body, something along those lines. You don't think anything of it. You just think, well, it's just gang violence. And yeah, it is, but it's on a newer, higher level. And for a lot of law enforcement, especially law enforcement in those middle ground towns, those places that aren't the big cities, you expect to hear about gang violence in New York City, in Chicago, in Dallas, in Houston, in Los Angeles. You expect those places because they've always historically had it. It's just a simple numbers game. They have millions of people. So in those millions of people, even the smallest percentage that are criminals and that are criminals in a gang and that commit these crimes, that's still a couple hundred people that the police department has to deal with. And in some of these cities, the numbers of gangs, total number of gangs, even gangs that are opposed to each other, outnumber the entire law enforcement of that city. And that's something that on a law enforcement aspect can make them a little jumpy, knowing that if they're patrolling in an area that has been dominated by several gangs, and these gangs have been at war and they've been making raids, and the gang task force has been out 24/7 for the last couple of days, and just as they think they're making headway, something else happens and it knocks them back to square one. I'm sure that can be unnerving, knowing that at any point in time, if a gang decides that that individual officer is not going to clock out at the end of the day, things can go wrong real quick. And that's a whole separate situation that people have to take into context on both sides of the law. They have to understand that, people are people. And at some point in time, some people decide that, hey, something is not worth my life and I need to change my situation, or they may perceive it as something is going to take my life and I need to change that situation. The next level, which runs very, very close to it and parallel to it, is when in fact governments do decide that, well, their policies aren't working, their policies have failed, their policies have actually made things worse. We are going to double down and step up and, be tough again. And we're going to put more police out there. They start with heavier recruiting. Suddenly, every police department has anti-gang squads and anti-high crime squads and vice squads and every type of detective out there all working together to get names, numbers, addresses, and locations for all this activity. And they enlist the help in some cases of the state police, because in most places, the state police, although they are smaller in number than larger cities, they can afford to send out 5, 10, 20 officers, depending upon what the situation is, as troopers to back up, either just to act as visual support, to be in those key visible locations, to sort of form a perimeter while the local police work on the inside. Basically, if we chase something out, you guys are on the outside there to catch it type of situation. Other times, it's simply a matter of it makes for more paperwork to get through. That makes it harder for the criminals when they do get arrested. You may not be getting arrested by a local police officer. You might be getting arrested by a state police officer. And depending upon how big your state is, they could just say, hey, there's no room at the local barracks near the city, so we're going to ship you 25 miles, 30 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles, whatever size of the state it is, to this other barracks, and you'll stay at that facility over there. Or because they are state police, they can get actual authorization to bring you straight to a state prison and hold you there for processing until they can get done with the investigation. So you're literally sitting in a state prison, in a cell, waiting for all of your paperwork to be processed, but you're effectively getting the bird's eye view of what your life could be like for the next 3 to 5 years, depending upon what you've been arrested for. And then in other cases, if it's connected to a big enough case, you might have the DEA, the ATF, and the FBI involved, and it becomes a whole big thing. Now, recently we're seeing in the state of New York, the city of New York, having had exactly those policies that were, well, not necessarily soft on crime, but they were lackadaisical on their enforcement of crime. Crime has gotten out of hand. A lot of people have been getting assaulted. There have been murders. There have been robberies, stabbings, shootings. You have police getting literally the snot beat out of them on the street in broad daylight by criminals. You've had train workers, the subway rider, the subway operators being assaulted. You have all this crime going on. So the city has effectively asked the state government for help. So they sent out state troopers and they sent out National Guard. Now, the initial setup was kind of, I will say, bureaucratically speaking, half-assed from what I've been reading about it. They put the military and the state troopers in stations and subways that were high visibility but had the lowest number of actual crimes before the actions, versus putting them in the stations and stops that had the higher number of crimes and showed the increase over the last year. That, to me, doesn't really make sense. That's more of a press release type of thing. Look at us doing something good. But they're going to continue to expand that throughout all of their 427 stops that they have across the boroughs. Now, with that understanding and the coupling of, again, using facial recognition, because if you've been arrested and convicted for a violent crime in a subway system against either a worker or a rioter, you will be banned by the state and the city from riding the subways for 3 years. Well, the only way you can enforce that is either you laser brand some type of barcode on a person, or with the facial recognition software, they're going to be in the system from their mugshots and the various biometrics put in. So any place they walk around and any outside camera on the streets is going to pick them up. And the second they come down into the subway system, they're passing by 3 or 4 cameras on their way down and over to the turnstiles. And by the time they get there, the local MTA police will be ready, waiting to tell them, nope, turn around right now or you're going to jail type of situation. And in the event that they somehow get on board a train, at some point they've got to get off. And the plan is also to have cameras and monitoring systems on each train car. effectively speaking, they're going to have to wear a hoodie with a mask and keep their head down to avoid being noticed. But again, if it's the middle of July and you've got a hoodie up and you're wearing a face mask, you are automatically going to have NYPD eyes on you every single step that you take to find out exactly what's going on. But all that comes into the view of a larger police system where you've got the military, the state police, any federal police and local police coordinated together, working together, utilizing all this high level of technology to, yes, deter and reduce crime. Absolutely. I do believe that the intent is there for that. But the management and the implementation of it is where we always, always, always run into problems, because for every one person that is a criminal, for every one individual that has a criminal intent, they can easily hide amongst a group of 10,000 people that don't have that idea, that don't have that desire, that don't want to have any problems whatsoever. But then that's where the issue comes, is the law enforcement has to weed through 9,999 to get to the 10,000th and find out that, okay, here's that one person, that had the intent, had the desire, and we've got them. You can't get that with random checks. You just can't. You might be able to scare a few rabbits out the hole with random checks, but for a person that is committed on taking lives or causing damage, random checks mean nothing. It's just simply, it's a roll of the dice. And even with random checks, you can look, depending upon how many lines you have, you can look to see, that line number 2 has those 2 officers. They are eyeballing each person left to right, up and down as they step up 5 places before they get to the checkout. So they're looking at you before you're within 5 places. You've got line number 4. That cop there seems to be pretty much, he'll look over as you step up, take a quick look, see if you're wearing anything that looks strange, inappropriate for the weather outside, especially if it's something that could conceal a weapon. If not, he waves you through. And you see line number 5, well, he's not paying attention at all. He's too busy talking to the cop over in line number 4. Criminals look at those things, they get an assessment, they think, where did they stand the best chance? And then they also look at the crowd. They look at that one guy who isn't doing anything wrong. He just looks shady, and he looks nervous, probably because he feels that he must look shady to the cops, but he's not doing anything wrong. And now the cops are looking at him like, why is this guy look so nervous? He's looking kind of shady, and he's looking at us like he hopes that we don't see him. And they realize that you don't want to be in that line with that guy. You want to be the next line over, because those cops are going to start paying attention to that guy to make sure that their friends, their coworkers, their partners are doing okay, that if that guy does something weird, they need to be ready to act. And that would be the place that you then pass through. Now, granted, if you're doing metal detectors and wanding, and you're doing x-ray machines, if you're doing full-on real security, and that's what I consider, if you're not going to have people to do hands-on pat-downs and put everything through a metal detector or preferably an x-ray, then you're really not doing anything at all. You're just basically, it's superficial. It is literally a Band-Aid on a bullet wound at that point. Because if your goal is to stop weapons, if your goal is to stop explosives, if your goal is to stop extraneous items, knives and clubs and things like that, unless you're doing a full search, you're not really doing anything at all, because it's very easy still with a high volume of people and a line that's stacking up out the door. People, no matter how cool and how calm they are, trained under pressure, under fire, I'm sure you can have a lot of those people that have actually served in the military and now they're police officers, and they can tell you about, the time that they were pinned down on the far side of a blown up Humvee and they didn't have any backup coming and they were SOL, but they stayed calm through the entire process. When they see a line of 200 people and they know that they've got 8 minutes left before they can take their break and they really got to go to the bathroom, you know what? They're going to be like, yeah, you're good. Okay, let's go. And they're going to start moving people along, because that's just human beings. That's just human nature. It's not about they're worried that someone's going to call their mom and say that he was being slow and he was being mean. It's just they have better things to do than standing at the head of a pointless line, checking through bags of people that have nothing but yoga equipment and, their protein drink in them. And that's when, as a criminal, and it's not all of them, there are still, like I said, criminals are humans and humans do dumb things, and you will have the dumb criminal trying to get over on something where they realize after the fact that, oh, yeah, maybe that did look a little suspicious, what I was doing with my gym bag just before I got into the line. But with a larger police presence, a larger military presence, a large militarized police presence, which again is something that a whole third of the nation protested against not that long ago. But now suddenly it's coming back around because a lot of people are demanding more police protection. You're going to have a cop on every corner. And I personally don't want that. To me, that is not a good society. That's not a well-functioning society if you literally have to have a cop on every corner, whether it be a physical human being or whether it be one of those monitoring towers that New York City uses, or those remote towers that you see in retail parking lots. They look like small generators on a trailer with a sky pole camera system set up. If you have to have those all around your city, you're not a safe city. If you have to have those throughout your state, you're not a safe state. And if you have to have those across every place in your nation, you're not a safe nation. I would much rather know that, yes, crime exists and criminals exist and crime does happen. But I'd much rather know that the citizens as a whole are trusted by their government enough that they don't have to be treated like criminals just to get from point A to point B. That you don't have to be screened every time you want to go into a grocery store, or you don't have to be checked every time you want to go see a movie, or you don't have to have your car waved through a special x-ray facility before you park into a parking garage. I'd rather have criminals be aware that there are going to be consequences that will face them if they commit a crime. Not criminals that are aware that they can get away with a certain dollar value in robbery. They can get away with certain types of assault. They can get away with certain types of bodily harm as long as the intent wasn't meant to be directed towards the person that was harmed, or it wasn't meant to be malicious in the way that it was carried out. As long as there's a lawyer on either side that knows that the law by itself, the written law by itself, means nothing until you have something to enforce it, you're going to have criminals continue to do what they do, and you're going to have citizens and civilians getting caught in the middle, trying to live their lives while not being harassed by both the people enforcing these laws and the people breaking their laws, because that's where we as citizens are right now. We are literally stuck in the middle. It's like if you watch a baseball game and the runner gets pickled between the baseman and the pitcher, going back and forth, they only have one direction that they can go, but they have to time it to get around the person on base with the ball. And each time they get a little closer and a little closer with each throw, it narrows that window of opportunity. And then you have to be either incredibly lucky or incredibly skilled to be able to get away and get to the base and get safe. And it should not be like that for the everyday citizen. They should not feel like they have to navigate a literal minefield between avoiding neighborhoods and streets and areas and time zones and bus routes and things like that where criminals prey on people, and also avoiding the areas where the police just automatically assume that, hey, if you're coming down this street, if you're walking into this facility, if you're doing anything around here, I'm going to stop you. I'm going to put you against the wall. I'm going to ask you all kinds of obscure questions in hope to make you nervous enough that you spill the beans on some crime that I was not aware that you committed, but now that you've said it, well, I take it as fact and you're going to jail. We shouldn't have to play that sort of game. And the worst part about it is all of that is a distraction for what's actually starting to happen. You're starting to see these gangs as a whole become more organized. That, yeah, a lot of petty crimes still go on, but bigger crimes are occurring. And you start looking at the areas that a lot of the larger gangs and the cartels, as a perfect example, are in control of. The cartels aren't just simply, oh, it's drugs, it's guns, it's this and it's that. They're controlling entire sections of the government, because while the cartels may fight against each other as crime organizations, they do a lot of their fighting, effectively speaking, in the boardroom and in the committee rooms, because each cartel has so many people that work in government that are in their pocket. They have so many people that work in law enforcement where they're getting the tip-offs of raids to warehouses, or they're getting the tip-off of where a raid is going to occur for a delivery route. And they're also, in the same aspect, sending out messages to their law enforcement informants that, hey, find out who this person is on this other side and then take care of that business for us and handle that business, because it's simply a case of that cop and that politician are in pocket with, or in bed with, the cartel. They're in their pocket. Because in some cases, it's plain and simple. They know where your family lives. They know where your grandmother is. They know where your sister is, even though she changed the name. You know, they've got people that are across the street from your kid's school, and a whole lot of bad things are going to happen if you don't cooperate. Or we already know the bribes that you took before we came along. We already know the evidence that you planted on a bunch of people to get them guilty. We already know the judge that has already signed off on certain acquisitions and certain actions to get this work done legally, as it were, in air quotes. So no one questions you when you bring a report up to say, hey, look, it was already signed off by the judge, so I just went on the information I had. That's the cartels, and that's where they're at, and they're moving that type of operation further and further into the United States. And we hear most of the talk about the border, the border, the border. And without a doubt, the border is an issue because that is an open area to basically bring bulk goods across. But you also can bring in individuals. You can get one or two people in. You can get operators and administrators from these cartels in. And a lot of them, they're not getting smuggled in directly in the back of some lumber truck. In some cases, they're literally just walking across the border, or they've got documents that say, hey, I'm a U.S. citizen and I'm just coming home from vacation, whatever the case may be. They get in, they help organize these street level gangs, getting them armed up, getting them trained up, finding out what the status is, giving them the information or the tools they need to eliminate any competition, because that's another thing that's going on is a lot of street level gangs are not necessarily joining together, but they're working in coordination to eliminate other gangs. And it comes down to fewer gangs, fewer competition, more territory, more control. They get benefits and bonuses if they're doing a good job for the cartels, because the cartels want to have a secure line of travel. They want to have secure assets in different locations throughout the country. And if you tag that on top of our war on terror, where we have our military pretty much in almost every single continent minus Antarctica, well, that we know of minus Antarctica, fighting in the war on terror, because terrorists take the long way around. Terrorists are good at playing the long game. Yes, you can have some that seem to like pop up here and there, but when you think about the large plans and operations that have been done, it wasn't just off the top of their head, hey, let's do this type of terrorist act next week. These are things that they spend months to years planning, moving people across the globe in some cases just to get them in a location 1,000 miles away on the other side of a ridge, because they can't directly get in there because the security coming from one direction is a lot tougher than coming from some other country with a different set of documents. It's hard to follow the money, and it's hard to find the paper trail, the breadcrumbs, as it were, when the terrorist is literally globe hopping for weeks, changing hands, changing identity, changing documentation, and moving through country after country, especially countries that are laxed in their immigration policies, that do let people come in and do let people get either asylum or take citizenship in a short period of time. And there are some countries that simply you can become a citizen for the right amount of money. And it's not even a bribe. It's just the policy of what they do. They say, oh, you want to be a citizen in the next 3 years? Here's what we need from you. And they give you the list of the things that you need to do. You get it done, you're a citizen. Boom, done. Simple. So it's not to say that every terrorist everywhere is going through that exact process, but it is harder to track them down when those that are being pushed and moved into certain locations for certain operations, they're being ensured that they're getting where they need to go. Some cases they get caught because they personally screw up, or someone else rats them out, or just by pure blind luck they come across the one agent at a customs office who recognizes them, or who remembers a briefing in a memo from 4 years ago where this individual was just a one line at the bottom of a page, and also be on the lookout for. Whatever the case may be, that's when those terrorists get caught. Now, with regards to our own U.S. border, there was believed to be a known terrorist working for I believe it was one of the Islamic factions from either Iraq or Afghanistan, that he was facing off against the camera saying that pretty soon you'll know exactly who I am. Now, that could have been a small fish coming out of a very big pond who's here to, make it in America as, the new terrorist on the block, or that very well could have been someone that the United States government goes, oh, that's interesting. We didn't realize he made it this far. We thought he was either dead or went back to his, his shoe shop repair. Whatever the case may be, when you have terrorists in the country with an agenda, it doesn't necessarily mean that from the moment he showed up on camera that his plans went into action that week. His plans could be 4 months, 5 months down the road. His plans might not even be his plans. His plans could simply be wait for that phone call or wait till you see this specific report on multiple news stations, then you'll know what to do because you've already been training. And that's the key problem, is a lot of the training for the gangs, for the terrorists, are taking place different places around the world, and they're bringing in recruiters and instructors and basically getting everyone else up to speed. You can have a scenario where you've got existing street gangs that know their streets, they know their cities, the towns, they know all the places where everything is. They are your pathfinders. They are your in-ground, in-country scouts. They know everything. And then you bring in the people from the cartels that have the terrorist operators as tag-alongs, and they come in and they say, okay, this guy needs to get access to the water filtration and water purification system for this city. This guy needs to find out where there are at least 3 major intersections of interstate highway with cargo train lines running underneath them. This guy needs to find out where the largest number of housing projects are along this part of a river. Whatever the case may be, you'll have the terrorists working with the cartels, getting the funding and the ammunition and everything else brought into them, smuggled in, and then the low-level street guys are the ones bringing out their maps, as it were, their GPS, and getting them all of the stolen goods that they need where they can nondescriptly move about and not get noticed, telling them, avoid this neighborhood during this time period or only come down this street after this time period because the police usually patrol there between this time and this time, whatever the case may be. Now, when you look at all of that, you think, well, pretty much everyone is screwed that isn't part of a gang, part of a cartel, part of a terrorist group, or part of the military or police. And you would be right to that aspect. And that's why people that have a lot of money, wealthy people and businesses, corporations, have their own gangs. They have their own military. They have their own private security. And it's more than the, shall we say, 75-year-old retiree who is just looking for a job to keep him busy and out of the house, out of his wife's hair to do, where he's just sitting around and hitting a buzzer on a door at a local factory. No, we're talking about the private security that are armed. We're talking about the private security that have actual intelligence agents and officers that can get information from the FBI, from the DOD, from the DOJ, that these people have had prior law enforcement and prior military experience, 5, 10, 20 years, whatever it is, and they're protecting companies and corporations worth billions. They're protecting individual people and assets worth hundreds of millions, and they're the ones that are going out there patrolling around these facilities and around these residential structures and compounds that are corporate owned or corporate controlled to make sure that the valuable asset, whether it be a breathing asset or it be just a material asset, are kept safe. You add their charter, their doctrine, which is to keep those things safe, that's going to definitely run into conflict with basically non-approved citizens and civilians in the neighborhood. You have the encroachment of gangs moving in because a gang sees an opportunity. They see something of value. Oh, those houses must have a lot of good stuff. Or this corporation here has got this warehouse full of all this nice electronics. We need to take a look at it. And then, of course, you have the law enforcement and the military aspect of it where, yes, in a world where the rule of law holds, law enforcement has say over, certain operations. But when law enforcement is maxed out or it's effectively above their pay grade and the military's brought in, that's a whole different set of operations that now go on. And when you have that with private companies that technically they have to obey the law, but they're not in that chain of command. They are their own chain of command. So if you've got a private corporation that is paying several $100,000 a year to a private security company to protect their corporate headquarters and their corporate executives by any means necessary, they're not inclined to be, shall we say, bending the knee to a local law enforcement cop that says, you guys can't park your truck here, or we have to come into the warehouse to make sure that there aren't gang members hiding in here. They're not hearing any of that nonsense. And yes, while I may be taking an overly simplistic approach to it, you get the idea in the conversation that you start to have all these people staring at each other, squaring off as to, who is in charge and who's going to do what and who's responsible for what and who's not going to tell who how they need to get their job done. you end up in a situation where, again, I bring the point up because if you're listening to this, you probably fit the description. If you're just a regular citizen trying to get by, trying to live your regular life, you by yourself are just that, you are on your own. So you have to start thinking about what you need to do to keep yourself and your family and whatever your situation is protected. Because with the increasingly greater chance that this year in 2024, as we move towards our election, we are going to see a definite increase in confrontation and conflicts going on. We're going to see situations that, we would only expect to see in some dramatic action film, but they're going to be real life, and it's going to be a real chaotic situation. It's going to be to the point where I won't say specifically, because I'm only speculating, that if something goes south and sideways, and it's part of the reason for the podcast, it's going to be bad. And you are going to have a certain point where you're going to have citizen militia versus the gangs versus the soldiers versus the security forces versus the police versus the citizens. It's like the snake eating its tail, the Ouroboros. It's just over and over in an endless cycle. It's basically going to be urban warfare in America, door to door, floor to floor, block by block. Everybody looking to either maintain control of what they have or seize control of what someone else has. And it's not going to be a pretty picture. And I'm not saying that that is the definitive end that we're heading towards. I am just saying that currently, right now, that is definitely a path of possibility. A lot of things can happen in a very short time period that can completely alter the trajectory of where we're going. But it ends up, no matter how you look at it, you're going to have that hit a certain point where it's a no turning back scenario. There's no way around it. It's going to happen, and you actually need to accept that fact. So thinking about it now and thinking about what you can do mentally and then physically, financially, emotionally prepare yourself for that, not necessarily going to make it easier, but it'll make it a lot smoother for you to transition from one thought process to the next thought process. I mean, yes, granted, still the idea of some massive street gang war and open warfare going on in our streets of America, the way you see happening in Haiti and you see happening in the different countries in Africa and different countries in South America and Central America and even just in Mexico, it sounds absurd and almost impossible, but it is still plausible. And at the immediate moment, we're not quite there yet, but we're pretty damn close. So it's definitely not going to be today, and most likely won't be tomorrow. It may not even be this year, but at some point it will be a scenario that will begin to unfold. And it all takes place in those small little innocuous things that are going on now, one way or the other. Because at some point, every pot comes to a boil. And once that happens, you need to figure out if you're the chef or if you're the frog. Well, I'll leave you with that, and I'll catch you in the next one.